All right, watch this space. We'll be back with more news. Conspiracy to debank crypto companies, Blockchain Association takes action. The Blockchain Association, a US-based nonprofit trade association for the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry, has sent Freedom of Information Act requests to the Federal Reserve, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, seeking information about the sudden closure of bank accounts held by cryptocurrency companies. This was revealed in a recent tweet by Jake Travinsky, Chief Policy Officer of Blockchain Association. Reports of debanking of cryptocurrency firms have been increasing, with many companies having their bank accounts closed without notice and without explanation. The reports are concerning especially after the failures of Silvergate, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature Bank. The trend suggests that regulators are trying to remove cryptocurrency companies entirely from the banking system. Hostile actions from regulators, a timeline. The move by the Blockchain Association follows several recent hostile actions from the regulators. On 3rd of January, the banking regulators issued a joint statement warning of key risks associated with crypto assets and crypto asset sector participants, which may have been the start of their debanking effort. On 27 January, the Fed issued a statement saying that banks cannot conduct crypto asset related activities like issuing or holding crypto as a principal. On 7 February, the Fed published it as a final rule despite not following a valid rulemaking process at the same time. Watch this space. At the same time, the Fed denied a membership application from Caitlin Long's Custodia Bank, citing concerns regarding the heightened risks associated with its proposed crypto activities. Even though Custodia planned to hold 108% reserves, finally on 23 February the regulators published another joint statement saying that crypto companies may pose heightened liquidity risks that banks must manage, although the statement stops short of saying to bank crypto. The implication is clear. In addition to the regulator's own statements, there have been many reports of debanking from Congress on the media. On 9 March, Senator Hagerty, along with Senators Mike Crapo, Tom Tillis, and Steve Daines, sent a letter to the regulators stating that it appears that the desired outcome from the banking regulators is the debanking of the crypto industry in America. On 12 March, signature was seized by NYDFS and turned over to the FDIC, even though board member and former representative Barney Frank said the bank was still solvent. He said regulators just wanted to send a message to get people away from crypto. On 15 March, GOP Majority Whip Tom Emmer sent a letter to the FDIC calling out the regulators' demonstrated effort to choke off digital assets from the United States financial system. Brian Brooks, former head of the OCC, shared his view that there's been a decision across the bank regulator agencies that crypto is inherently risky and needs to be extricated from the banking system. Illegal actions. Former Senator, Jake Chervinsky argued that there's no valid reason to debank crypto companies. They're all like all other law-abiding companies that need banking accounts to operate. They hold dollars to pay rent, salaries, taxes. If regulators are debanking crypto companies, they're breaking the law. In all of their statements, the regulators have said that banks are neither prohibited nor discouraged from providing banking services to customers of any specific class or type. The Blockchain Association wants to know if that's true. The Blockchain Association's FOIA requests. Hold on a second, please. The Blockchain Association FOIA requests are demanding certain documents related to the debanking of crypto companies, such as instructions to banks to close accounts, coordination among the regulators, and the closure of Signature Bank. The requests may take a long time to get responses, but the association intends to pursue them aggressively and to share the information as soon as possible. The association's appeal to the public. The Blockchain Association is calling on the public to share their stories of debanking by emailing debanked@theblockchainassociation.org. The association wants to hear from those who had a bank account closed, those who tried to open a new account and were refused, and those who work at a bank and had contacts with regulators. Travinsky's assertion that debanking the crypto industry is illegal raises questions about the motives of regulators. From U.S. Times Post, crypto faces a banking crisis. For some, it's a conspiracy. A group of Republican senators led by Tennessee's Bill Hagerty wrote a March 9th letter to the bank regulators supporting that interpretation. The statements from regulators have causing banks to reassess their decision to offer banking services to the crypto sector, the letter reads. This coordination behavior is disturbingly reminiscent of Operation Choke Point. Operation Choke Point 2.0 is very real, says Caitlin Long, CEO of Custodia, the spurned bank. Many banks have taken a big step backwards with their crypto activities, and many crypto businesses from small to very large are looking for banking accounts. Since January, Custodia has been inundated with requests from crypto companies looking for a banking partner. Long says, but without federal oversight, it can only offer a limited range of U.S. dollar services. Custodia is suing the Fed for rejecting its application for membership. Others are less convinced of the choke point theory. Economist Frances Coppola, who worked in risk management for HSBC and the Royal Bank of Scotland, says she doesn't believe there's been a coordinated attack on crypto, but the failures of Silvergate and Signature are a reflection of the vulnerability operating models. Caleb Frenzen, a corporate banking analyst at Research from Cubic Analytics, says talk of underhanded tactics among regulators is pure speculation. But whether accidental or intentional, crypto is facing a banking crisis in the U.S. The closure of Silvergate and Signature has prompted crypto companies to urgently seek new banking partners. Circle Internet Financial, whose stablecoin USDC was temporarily unpegged from its peg to the dollar amid alleged exposure to Silvergate and SVB, arranged over the weekend to expand an existing relationship with BNY Mellon. But not everyone's home and dry. Crypto investment from My Capital and Digital Asset Capital Management have started searching for new banking partners abroad, while trading platform Ledger X has been forced to find a new bank for the second time after switching from Silvergate to Signature. Neither company responded to a request for comment. That's interesting. We'll keep an eye on those banks in particular. Let's see those again. Those are BNY Mellon is possibly supporting Circle Internet Financial, um, who has a stable USDC, but it kind of fluctuated after Silvergate and SVB were shut down. And My Capital and Digital Asset Capital Management, they've also started working on some trading platforms. LedgerX. So because of the value they represent to banks, larger crypto companies will likely be able to be keeping their existing accounts in the U.S., Carter says, meaning U.S. residents will continue to have access to crypto exchanges, but smaller companies are crawling, he says. The result will likely be that some companies migrate to countries with more benign regulatory engines, some will struggle to raise venture capital dependent on access to banking, and others don't start at all, Carter says. With the fall of Silvergate and Signature, the only two banks offering real-time, every-hour, everyday payments the 24/7 crypto industry will have to adjust to operating at a different pace. For traders, this means that bets cannot be completed outside of regular banking hours, which is likely to create additional volatility. Swan Bitcoin's Clipstein doesn't believe in the idea that U.S. regulators have launched a coordinated attack on the crypto industry driven by a man behind the curtain pulled the strings. He's also more optimistic about the prospects of companies orphaned by Silvergate and Signature finding new banking partners, saying banks are usually happy to take your money. Clipstein also agrees with regulators' ambition to fight back against fraud in the crypto sector. But the frustration, he says, is that legitimate crypto businesses will be collateral damage because crypto is so shady and some of the companies are so poorly managed. The whole category is toxic on average. It's a bunch of dog S, he says. So it's hard to ask a bank with hundreds of thousands of accounts to differentiate between good crypto business run by mature adults and bad ones. We must be painted with the same brush. All right, this is Meet Kevin on the matter.
All right, here we go. Okay. There's now talk circulating about a $2 billion potential bail-in for Credit Suisse, and what we've got to talk about is how this could affect. Hold on a sec. That Silicon Valley Bank is backed by taxpayers. In other words, if the Federal Reserve and Treasury lose money, the taxpayers are the one who have to pay for it. And that is very frustrating because a lot of people see that as sort of the 99% bailing out the rich 1% who have connections in Silicon Valley, including the governor himself who banked at Silicon Valley Bank and was begging the White House to bail them out. Doesn't seem very just, but bail in a bull, that's such a tough one to say. Bail in a bull bonds were introduced exactly to try to prevent taxpayers from taking a hit. So that's a big deal. And what they did is they introduced these fancy acronyms as sort of like shock absorbers, and they called them AT1s. They were introduced after the financial crisis. And basically what happens is after a regulator steps in to protect depositors at Credit Suisse, when and if that happens, anybody who owns that debt basically has their debt become worthless. So let's draw that out to make that even simpler. It's basically an instant eradication of an obligation to someone else. And it might be easier to see that visually because these bail-in-a-ball bonds are kind of crazy. But they're useful, again, to protect taxpayers. So think about it like this. Let's say you hold this piece of paper, and this is a note. A note is a fancy way of saying I owe you. That's where these terms came from, basically. Like you handed me a note and it said, I promise to repay you. A promissory note. I promise to repay. Anyway, let's say this note is worth $1,000. And you have the note, and who has the $1,000? Credit Suisse got the $1,000. But Credit Suisse has to pay that back to you with interest. And so on the side of Credit Suisse, this looks like debt. On the side of the person who holds the note, it looks like an asset. And so what European regulators say, and this is different from what we have seen in most banks in America, what European regulators say is, look, if we come in to protect depositors at Credit Suisse, the first people we want to lose money are the people who hold these notes right here, these IOUs. So what we're going to say is, before the taxpayers pay a dime to help Credit Suisse, what we're going to do is we are going to delete the existence of these notes. That means these people, these bondholders, lose their asset, but Credit Suisse loses that debt. Now, that's actually critically important because banks operate with certain statutory minimum capital reserve requirements. It's basically like saying, hey, if the bank has $100 in deposits, they need to keep about $10 in the bank and they can go play with $90. That's about a 10% capital reserve ratio, right? There are ratios like this that also apply to how much debt a bank is allowed to have. So if a bail-inable bond can be eradicated, it serves as an early warning sign that the bank is potentially failing. And it helps mitigate some of the pain potentially, and maybe even prevent failure by eliminating that debt the bank had, at least some of the debt that the bank had, potentially up to $82 billion of such debt. Now, what's neat about this is, again, A, it protects the taxpayer, but B, it potentially prevents the entire bank from actually failing. The problem is, or I guess maybe the early problems that we're seeing now, is people who hold those notes, they're like, oh crap, I might lose my entire note. So in other words, let's say you held this note on this side. Let's say you held this $1,000 asset and you had an IOU. What would you want to be doing with that right now with all this news circulating about Credit Suisse? If you held that piece of paper, you might be like, man, this is becoming a toxic asset. It might go to zero. Well, if something has a risk of going to zero, what do people usually do? They sell it. And that lowers the
And here's Blockworks on the crypto story.
Bank charters for crypto-focused banks. That was the big red flag for me. But other things like joint statements from all the various federal agencies covering these things, saying over and over that crypto, providing services to the crypto industry poses safety and soundness risks, that crypto introduces systemic risks into the banking sector, which is of course nonsense. And
it's the other way around. Yeah.
And so, you know, I was hearing this from bankers directly. I was hearing this from startup founders, executives in the crypto industry that were trying to onboard with banks and being told it doesn't work if you're small. You have to be really big. You have to be a super valuable client to offset the cost that we, the bank, incur for servicing a crypto firm, or being met with a total blacklist on crypto firms. Bankers now tell me that they have to individually approve with the FDIC each new crypto client that they bring on, which is an insane roadblock to doing business. So I called this choke point 2.0. It's not exactly the same as choke point 1, but that was the most analogous term. And since I wrote that in February, of course, the pressure campaign has ratcheted up an insane amount, more than I ever expected.
Well, we knew it was happening to us because the Fed leaked to the press 2 days before it voted Custodia down. What we started hearing, and we didn't know where the leak was coming from at the time, but we started hearing from the press that Custodia was about to be voted down. This was presented to us by multiple press outlets as a foregone conclusion, preordained. By the way, this is supposed to be a fair process, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. It became very clear that both the White House and the Fed were involved. And one of the reasons that we ultimately concluded that the Fed was involved is because we sent the general counsel of the Fed a response letter after they had asked us to withdraw our application. And within hours, a reporter was recounting it back to our PR representative. Okay, so that didn't come from us. Think about the ethics violations and the procedural violations that occurred there. But ultimately, then it became clear. And in fact, actually, we had, thankfully, there's a sieve in Washington. We had insiders come forward and confirm to us the White House was involved. And it was pretty obvious that day of the custodial denial, because the White House and the Fed coordinated to release their press releases at exactly the same time. Now, here's the smoking gun. Everybody at the time was speculating, was there going to be another Operation Choke Point 2.0, as you said, Nick? What we have is evidence in email, because a reporter revealed to us what the reporter was told. And the reporter told us that they were told that within the last 48 hours that all the Fed and OCC bank charter applicants had been asked to withdraw their applications or they would be voted down. Okay, so I knew from the early stage that Operation Choke Point 2.0 was absolutely underway and absolutely coordinated. Again, the interesting question is, wait a minute, there are due process protections for applicants for bank charters. They are supposed to be reviewed by the agencies on their individual merits. And then all of a sudden, press leaks are confirming that the Fed and the OCC applicants were asked to withdraw at the same time. Come on.
I agree with that. Now, for those who might not be quite as familiar with the regulatory apparatus that oversees banking, Caitlin, you were just sort of mentioning some of the bodies there, but my memory of Operation Choke
in January that pretty clearly came from the top brass. And again, we know a lot more than I can share right now. It will eventually all come out, but I think there were illegal things done here.
And this is Caitlin Long, who was mentioned in a couple of the articles that we went over.
And certainly things that massively overstep the regulatory jurisdiction of the banking agencies. To your point about Operation Choke Point 1.0, yes, the Department of Justice was involved, but there were really not there weren't criminal charges brought against the banks. It was mostly the FDIC. And I shared with Nick, as he was preparing that Operation Choke Point 2.0 blog post that just went viral, how is it that the bank regulators have that much power? They very much do. And yes, they can shut down a bank and seize lawful property, even if the bank is solvent, right? We're going to talk about Signature Bank later, but it appears that at least there are credible allegations that that's exactly what happened with Signature Bank. That was a taking of private property by the government. But they have, in some cases, at least there's ambiguity, suggesting that the bank regulators do have that kind of power. So when you get the FDIC going on a power trip against industries that it doesn't like, and in Operation Choke Point 1.0 covered 30 different industries before Congress started embarrassing them and they backed down. Now, by the way, they're starting with crypto this time. They started with payday lenders back in Operation Choke Point 1.0. But I think everyone should expect that the politically incorrect industries, or politically out of favor industries, however you want to say it, are next. It's oil and gas, it's mining, it's coal, it's firearms, it's ranching, right? And by the way, I just listed the core industries of my home state of Wyoming. We're going to care a lot about this. And part of the reason why Wyoming created the new Special Purpose Depository Institution charter, which took effect in 2019, is precisely that. There were, if you go back and look at the legislative record in Wyoming, there were legislators who lost their bank accounts for their businesses. In one case, a firearms dealer who almost went out of business. Okay, he had a lawful, legitimate business. He lost his bank account, and he had to scramble to replace it, because the firearms industry was out of favor. And so he was very interested in having the new type of bank charter where FDIC insurance was optional for precisely that reason. So now you asked me, what are the bank regulators? How does it all work? It's a very confusing system. The chartering authorities, we have something called a dual banking system where the charters are equal. There is a federal charter, the OCC bank charter, and then there are 50 different states plus territories that can charter banks as well. So you either have a federal charter or a state charter. There's a law that went into effect during the Clinton administration called Regal-Neal that allowed for interstate banking among state chartered banks that makes them equal to national banks. Okay, so there really functionally is no difference in the grand scheme of things between a nationally chartered bank or a state chartered bank. Then you have the FDIC and the Fed. Those actually are not chartering authorities, but they are supervisors. So state chartered banks generally, not always, generally have a federal regulator, and the state chartered banks choose whether the FDIC is their regulator or whether the Fed is their regulator. And the FDIC, of course, is an insurance fund as well. And then on top of that, of course, the Fed runs the payment systems. A lot of people think of the Fed as just executing monetary policy. No, the vast majority of the people who work at the Fed are in the bank supervision division or in what's called RBOPs, Reserve Bank Operations. And that's basically the payment system. The Fed is a confusing organization. The Board of Governors is a federal agency subject to federal laws like the Administrative Procedure Act, the Freedom of Information Act. The 12 reserve banks are technically privately owned. They live in in a state of perpetual ambiguity, though, because they do take administrative action. And there's a lot of gray area, and they exploit that because they sometimes choose, oh, we're an agency for this purpose, or we're not an agency for that purpose.
What is this nothing you talk about?
And boy, there's a lot of case law around the whole question of those 12 regional reserve banks. Are they private organizations or are they government organizations? But that's where all the balance sheet is. So the whole idea of a central bank digital currency, it's not going to be issued by the Board of Governors in DC. It's going to be issued by the 12 regional reserve banks. And there is some thought that one of the reasons why the Fed came down like a ton of bricks on Custodia is because Custodia last July was granted the patent in the United States for tokenization of bank deposits. And because those 12 regional reserve banks are quasi-private organizations, they're subject to US patents. And so if there were ever going to be a tokenization of a bank deposit, they might need to shove that patent aside. So I'll leave it at that. I have no knowledge that entered into the equation. I will say that we spent a lot of time at Custodia doing a lot of work on our proposed digital dollar, AVIT, and the Fed was fully aware of everything we were doing, as well as as well as the existence of that patent. And
we could go on for a while with that. That was great. That was Caitlin Long. So watch this space. We'll be back with more news. Remember, your engagement through a like, a share, or a sub will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been